Yesterday, I interviewed your rival, Kemi Badenoch, and I asked her if she wanted to be Prime Minister. And she didn't say yes. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you want to be Prime Minister?
I do. And I don't say that out of personal ambition. I say it because I want the Conservative Party to be in government. We are the world's oldest and hitherto most successful political party. We are doers. We should aspire to be back in government again. Now, I don't pretend that's going to be easy. We've just lost our worst ever electoral defeat. The public are deeply sceptical of us right now, so we've got a mountain to climb. We've got to persuade them that we have the practical, serious solutions to the challenges facing this country. It's the NHS, the economy, immigration. That's why I've used this leadership election to talk in policies, in substance, rather than just in rhetoric or platitudes.
Well, is that what you're saying that because she obviously hasn't announced policies, is that what you're saying she's done?
Well, it's a point of difference between the two of us. Of course, I believe that we have to be conservative. We've got to be more conservative. We've got to talk about our values and our principles. But I think when you've got a sceptical public who have left us in their millions, we have to also talk in substance and set out on some of the biggest issues facing our country. How are we actually going to tackle those challenges?
And you don't think she's doing that? You don't think she's talking in substance? Is that what you're saying?
Well, by her own recognition, she said that now is not the time to do that. I think if you look at, say, an issue like immigration, where we've lost 4 million people to reform, if we're going to bring those Conservatives back home to us, we need to have substantive policies. And mine are, let's set a cap in Parliament in the tens of thousands on legal migration, something we've never done before. On illegal migration, let's leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Let's detain and deport people within days.
We know your policies on immigration. We'll talk about that more in the interview.
That I think will persuade people to come back to us.
I guess why I wanted to start here is because I feel that your very different answers to that question about whether you want to be PM speaks to a difference in your character. You know, it feels like you're someone who is brimming with ambition, someone who kind of decided they wanted to be PM when you were at school. Is that fair?
No. I have, come to this over the years. I only decided to stand for the leadership when I finally won my seat, which was in doubt at the general election
in
North Nottinghamshire.
We're not supposed to believe that, are we?
No, it's just the truth. I mean, Of course I've always believed in politics, public service. I've always wanted
Don't take me this wrong way.
To have as much influence as I can over things, because that's the way you achieve things in politics. But I didn't have some long-standing plan to do this. The difference is not that, Sophie. The difference is I want our party to be in government. I don't view the Conservative Party as a Twitter account. I don't want to just be at the dispatch box shouting at Keir Starmer. I want us to actually win an election. And that is why I've tried to set out a very clear stall, a very clear set of policies and ideas as to how we win back the trust of the British public. I guess,
some people's criticisms of you may be that you seem like someone who kind of started off with the idea that you wanted to be Conservative leader and almost worked backwards from there, coming up with the policies that you think are going to get there.
I don't think so. I mean, my values haven't changed one bit. I've been, the same person. It all comes back to my childhood, my upbringing in Wolverhampton, the small towns that I represent in places like North Nottinghamshire. To me, it's about family. It's about self-reliance, it's about small businesses, it's about free enterprise, it's love of country, it's strong defences. Those are my values. But yes, it's absolutely the case that as a result of the experiences I've had as a minister, for example, at the Home Office, and the thought that I've given in recent months and years to how we tackle the challenges that we're facing as a country, that I've come up with what I think are the right solutions. And I think that is respectful to the membership, because they deserve to know what my plan is. And I think a plan today is always more useful, more valuable than the promise of one tomorrow. And I think it's also the only way in which we can begin to restore the public's trust and confidence. If you look at some of the issues we're facing right now, like how do you get growth going again in this country? Well, I think you do it by helping people off welfare and into work, by giving young people real skills, not just low-value degrees. Frankly, close down our 10% failing universities and replace them with hubs for apprenticeships. Let's get cheap and reliable engines. Let's trade in ideas.
So you're talking about they're closing down 10% of universities and getting rid of some degrees. Do you think people need to, get real, that some degrees are effectively a bit worthless?
Yes. I mean, 20% of our young people today are leaving university and then earning less than if they'd never been to university in the first place.
So
That's a massive failure.
What kind of degrees would you shut down?
Well, I would take...
Give me some examples.
I would take the 10% worst ranked courses at our universities on the objective rankings that are provided by universities.
So give me some examples of degrees that you think should be shut down.
Well, it's not about me choosing, which course I do or don't like. I would take the objective rankings that we have and say if those courses are in the bottom 10%, then the state shouldn't be funding them anymore.
This reminds me of my brother who, used to sort of email. I remember, because I did English literature, he messaged me before, with a chart showing how your earnings are supposed to be really bad if you do English literature. Is that the kind of thing that you get rid of, English lit? What would you get rid of?
No, not at all. It's not about me picking which courses I like or don't like. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at those courses which are objectively ranked as the worst courses. Let's not fund them anymore, and let's use that money to fund apprenticeships. If we did that, we would be able to fund 130,000 more apprenticeships. My dad was an apprentice. He left school at 16, became an apprentice, later set up a business out of his white van on our drive at home. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a perfectly good route. I'd be happy for my kids to do that, as long as they were high quality. So let's raise the esteem of apprenticeships and make them more available. It's things like that will get the economy actually growing.
I was interested to see that you want to see more capital spending in the NHS. So do you think the NHS needs more money?
I think it might need more money in the years ahead because we've got an ageing population and we have underinvested in the capital, technology, for example, the structures and buildings, hospitals. But the key question is not so much how much you're putting in, it's what you're getting out. And I worry that in recent years, including on our watch as Conservatives, we've lionised the money that we've put in, but not worked through how do you ensure that that actually is improving the quality of care for patients. And part of the problem is the poor performance of the management of the NHS itself. In 90% of NHS trusts last year, not a single manager was sacked for poor performance. Can you imagine a business operating like that? Of course you couldn't. That is letting people down. I want to do for the NHS what we did for our schools in the 2010s. Empower the good managers and sack the bad ones. Drive up productivity, ensure that we get better value for money for the taxpayer and a better quality of care for the patients. That's the sort of thing that I talk about when I say we should be obsessed with how we can improve the NHS. Because we don't know what the world will look like in 4 or 5 years' time, but we do know that whether we are trusted on the NHS will be a major factor in whether we can get back into government.
Some people think that if the NHS is going to survive, we need to look at an insurance model. Is that something that you think should be on the table?
I think we should be open-minded to other options, but I don't think that's a likely outcome. I think the most important thing we can do is think carefully about the structure of the NHS, the role of the private sector in delivering, but free at the point of delivery, how we can reduce the pressure on the NHS.
But you think it's something that should be on the table?
Well, I always think you should be open-minded, but I don't think that is a likely outcome. I believe in the NHS as free at the point of delivery. That is a principle that most people in our country hold dear. The NHS has been important to my family. It saved my dad's life recently when he had a serious stroke. But I've also seen its failings. He was then put on a very long waiting list to get the aftercare that he deserved. So we've got to try and fix the way it is actually working today. And we Conservatives should approach that with a degree of humility because the NHS is not functioning as well as it should do. On all of the big issues, I've tried to say we just didn't do enough to deliver. Of course, we defend the things we got right as a government over 14 years, but let's be honest about the mistakes. That is the way in which we begin to rebuild the public's trust and confidence.
Another big issue is taxes, of course. What do you think the top rate of tax should be?
I'd like to bring it down, of course, but it's easy, not serious politics, just to go and choose your least favourite tax and say that you're going to cut it. The really hard yards of growing an economy are to talk about serious economic reforms.
But
That's what I've done in recent years.
What the top rate of tax should be is quite a serious question, isn't it? It's something that a lot of the Conservative members will care deeply about.
It wouldn't be serious for me on your programme, with all due respect, just to announce what the Conservative Party's fiscal policies are going to be in 4 or 5 years' time.
I'm not asking you to do that. I'm asking what you think it should be. It's like a principle.
Of course, as a principle, I think taxes are too high in this country. I believe in the dynamic effect of taxation. When I was Housing Secretary, I persuaded Rishi Sunak to cut stamp duty, led to the largest number of housing transactions on record. However, the way to get this economy growing again is to ensure we actually reform it. That's why I say, let's build more homes to create jobs and prosperity by densifying and regenerating our big cities. Let's have cheap and reliable energy by building new nuclear power stations, saying that gas is here to stay, the opposite of what Ed Miliband is going to do. Let's help people off welfare. If we got our welfare bill just back to the point it was immediately prior to COVID, we'd save £12 billion a year. That would be enough to cut 2p off the basic rate of income tax. So I want the Conservative Party to have a serious and credible plan for the economy. We lost part of our reputation for sound management of the public finances, particularly in the events around the mini-budget. I've been very honest about that. We've got to restore that. I don't think you restore that just by choosing your least favourite tax, saying that we're going to cut it on the TV show.
OK, not even this one. That's disappointing. Now, you, of course, have talked an awful lot in your campaign about the need to reduce immigration. Before you came on this programme, on Twitter, I said, is there anything that you'd like me to ask Robert Jenrick? And an awful lot of people talked about the Mickey Mouse mural. Now, this is back when you were Immigration Minister, and you asked for a Mickey Mouse mural at a children's immigration centre to be painted over. Can you see why, for a lot of people, that seems like a very cruel thing to do?
Well, look, I would never want to do anything that was anything other than compassionate towards children. I'm a dad of 3 young children. I've always taken interest in how this country can be a big-hearted one when it comes to refugees. In fact, my family was the first to take in Ukrainian refugees towards the start of that conflict. And when I was a minister responsible for immigration, I did a lot to try and ensure that we were looking after unaccompanied children properly. When I came into office, we were housing them in rudimentary hotels in seaside towns. I closed them down and got those young people into foster care and more appropriate accommodation. What I was also concerned about, however, was the fact that there were a large number of adults coming into this country posing as children, and that was then placing actual children, whether that's refugees or children, our own children in this country, in real danger. Let me give you an example. There was a man who posed as a child, went into foster care, went to a school in Bournemouth, ended up killing someone on the streets of that town, an actual army veteran. So it is important that we make sure that the places that people arrive in the first hours that they're in the UK, are places of law enforcement, in which we treat people in a careful manner.
You're talking about... Sorry, you're raising some very important questions there, but the question is about a mural that you asked to be painted over. Can you see why some people think that was a cruel thing to do?
Well, I said I wouldn't do it again, but the reason that we changed the nature or the character of the place in which migrants first came to when they arrived in the UK was to ensure that we were weeding out those adults who are posing a real risk to children.
That's nothing to do with a Mickey Mouse mural, though, is it? I mean, if you're like, a 25-year-old pretending to be 18, it's not going to make a difference to you if there's Mickey Mouse greeting you or not, is it? But it might make a difference to the person who is 8 years old.
Sure. But look, all I can say, Sophie, is I would never do anything other than try to support children in a compassionate manner, and my record speaks to that.
Are you sorry about that? Are you sorry about doing it?
Well, I said it's not something I would do again, but the substantive... I mean, you're asking me this over and over again, but the substantive question here
but I don't think you've answered
how do we actually treat children, unaccompanied children, when they come into our country? And the reforms that I did as a minister meant that they were treated in an immeasurably better manner than before I was a minister. Rather than being in a hotel in a seaside town, often poorly treated, they're actually now in the loving care of foster parents. That is the kind of minister that I was and the way I would always look to treat children.
You, of course, famously resigned over the immigration bill. I guess what confuses me slightly is that you were immigration minister at the time. So that was kind of your bill? I mean, you could have taken it up with the immigration minister.
Well, there was a choice for me at the time. Take a bill through Parliament, which I knew didn't work, and which, frankly, everyone in Cabinet knew didn't work, or leave the government and make the case in Parliament, where I was honest with myself and with the public, where I set out amendments to try and improve the bill, to make it actually work, get those flights off to Rwanda, and I chose to do the latter. I thought that was the most honest approach. I didn't want to be just another minister who made and broke promises on a question so important as immigration. I didn't leave in a fit of pique. I worked hard, relentlessly, behind the scenes to make sure that we did get that bill into the best shape. And I got a lot of concessions out of the Prime Minister. But when I knew it still wouldn't work, I thought it would be the wrong thing to do to say that black is white. And ultimately, I was right. If you look at the argument that I made, I said that we wouldn't get flights off to Rwanda, that there would be a merry-go-round of legal claims. And that is exactly what happened.
And everyone in Cabinet, you say, knew it was wrong, that it wasn't going to work, you think?
I think everybody involved in that decision knew perfectly well that that policy was not going to succeed, but they turned a blind eye to it. I wasn't willing to be a minister like that.
Are there any people that you would name as having turned a blind eye to it?
Well, I'm not going to get into naming individuals, but I think it's pretty clear that at the time, few of us were willing to stand up and say, we have to do something differently because we can't allow illegal migration just to continue for years, for decades to come. It's causing immense harm to our country. We've got hotels full of illegal migrants. We've got communities that are being blighted by it. You've got tensions in parts of our country as a result. I want this to come to an end. So do millions of people across our country.
If you win on Saturday, will you offer Kemi Badenoch a job in your shadow cabinet?
Yes.
I asked her that yesterday as well. She said that she would give you a job, but whether you'd want to do what she thinks you should do is a different matter. It doesn't sound like it'd be a great offer, does it?
Well, look, I don't know. I want to get the best players onto the pitch. I want to respect my parliamentary colleagues. And so somebody talented, like Kemi Badenoch, should get a senior position in which she can play a full part in restoring and renewing the Conservative Party, as indeed the others who stood this summer. Someone like James Cleverly. I've said that if he wanted to be deputy leader of our party, he should do, because he's a unifying presence. Now, he's not endorsing anyone, I hasten to add, but I want to make sure that we are actually uniting the party. I think I'm the best placed person to do that. That is my nature. I take strong positions on the big issues of the day, but I do so seeking to persuade, not needlessly provoke, and to create a strong team.
It was quite interesting. I was kind of looking back at, the kind of history of recent or not so recent leadership elections. When John Major won in 1990, he gave his rivals, Heseltine and Hurd, top jobs. They then went on to win an election. David Cameron gave David Davis a role. They won an election. But when that doesn't happen, like with Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, for example, or with Ken Clarke and Ian Duncan Smith, it tends to be that the party doesn't unite, doesn't go on to win the election. So how important do you think it is that you and Kemi Badenoch, I guess, kind of dust it all off and work together?
I think it's actually incredibly important. The public are sick of the drama, the infighting, the excuses. That needs to end. And Kemi, myself, the whole 121 Conservative MPs in the Parliamentary Party need to come together, beginning this Saturday, and do our job, which is to be a strong opposition to this Labour government and to begin to rebuild the trust and the confidence of the British public.
I've just got one final question for you. I'll be completely honest, before this leadership contest, I thought you were quite posh, right? And actually, it's not really the case. Your dad was a gas fitter. You've sort of spoken about him a bit in this interview. But it feels until kind of recently, you haven't really lent into that story. I mean, he could have been the new sort of tool maker. Was that a mistake, do you think?
Well, you're right. I haven't really spoken about my upbringing in the past. I have done so more over the course of the summer, and I'm not ashamed that I'm proud of the places I grew up in. It ultimately forged me, my Conservative values, and it's what drives me in politics. I believe in these places, the communities I represent. In this leadership election, some people have said that I'm provincial or have criticised me for being from the Midlands. I want the Conservative Party to be firmly on the side of working people from small towns and cities across this country and thinking every day about them. How do we get their kids onto the housing ladder? How do we make sure they have better jobs? How do we make sure that public services are actually working for them? Keep their energy bills down with a sensible energy policy. And yes, make sure that we actually stand up for their values and the things that concern them, like illegal migration, like British history and culture and identity. That is the role of the Conservative Party, and that's what I would like to do if I'm lucky enough to lead it forwards.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you this
evening. Thank you.